Good evening, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to listen to the ThreatLocker breakout session. I'd like to talk a little bit about how scary the applications we run are. Every time that you open an application on your computer, whether that application is Microsoft Office, Google Chrome, PowerShell, or Angry Birds, that application has access to everything that you have access to as a user. It doesn't matter if you're a local administrator, a domain admin, or a normal user. If you download and run Zoom, like we are today, or Angry Birds, or any application that doesn't necessarily even need to elevate, that application can access all of the content, all of the files that you can access, and that includes encrypting or copying or stealing that data. We'll take Zoom as an example. We're here today, joined on Zoom, because unfortunately, we couldn't make it to Nashville. Regrettably, Zoom has had its fair share of vulnerabilities. And while we're using a ring-fence session of Zoom now, over the last few weeks, Zoom have fixed some major flaws in their system that allowed attackers to deliver malware, deliver fileless malware, or steal your credentials using the Zoom session you're on. Thankfully, those bugs have now been fixed, but this is just one example of how an application can potentially be weaponized and used against you. I want to go back to 2003. Back in 2003, I was working in a large multinational in the IT department. In the morning, we started receiving reports that users were getting emails with zip files in them. In those zip files were executables, because back in 2003, the scariest type of malware we got was a zip file with an executable in it. We sent an email out to all staff notifying them not to open any attachments from suspicious senders and to be extra cautious. And a few hours later, we received a call from the front desk. The user called and said, "I'm trying to open an attachment. The website's apparently down and I can't open the attachment to see the error." So we rushed down to the front desk expecting the worst. And by the time I got down there, the lady on the front desk was blubbering with tears. Her makeup was running down her face because there was some dick pics on her screen, essentially. She'd opened a piece of malware that had installed all these pop-ups and shown pills for penis enlargements and other things. And she was incredibly upset and blubbering. But the bottom line was, I was able to just rebuild that machine. I didn't spend any time cleaning it. I'm sure I could have cleaned it, rebuild that machine, and that was the end of that malware. The worst damage we had was an upset person on the front desk. And back then, we used to talk a lot about liability from people having to see things that they didn't like. Like I said, she was upset. Fast forward to 2014, I was asked to help on a ransomware recovery for an insurance company in Australia. About 7 days into the recovery, essentially this company, somebody had opened an email. That email had infected, encrypted all their servers, all of their backups, and they couldn't get it back. They'd paid $20-something thousand in ransoms, because back then the ransoms were cheaper, and they still didn't get the data back. Essentially, for all intents and purposes, the data was just garbage. So they asked me to come in and help with the recovery. The idea was that we could try and recover it through other means and through disk recovery techniques and other techniques like that. About a week into the recovery, the owner of the insurance company, the CEO, called me. This was a 60-something-year-old man, and he was crying down the phone. And this got me thinking, how in a just over 10-year span have we gone from someone being upset over seeing inappropriate content to someone, a fully grown man, crying his eyes out because he genuinely thinks he's going to lose his business? Now, the positive side is we did manage to get a lot of data back. It wasn't without pain, and they did suffer severe consequences, but they didn't go out of business. Fast forward to 2017, 18, 19, we're seeing ambulances turned away from doors because hospitals are shut down over ransomware. We're seeing government agencies brought to their knees. In Florida in 2019, government agencies paid over $2 million in ransom to foreign state nations to get their data back and get up and running. So again, 911 services are down, water services are down. Now in 2020, everybody is working remotely. Everybody's working from home and the perimeter has completely gone. New tools are being used and weaponized against us, and new tools are being used for legitimate purposes. All of this change has exposed us even more than we've ever been before. Now, the cold, hard truth about this is every one of these companies, everyone I'm talking about who has had ransomware attacks are running antiviruses. The antiviruses did not help. And it's not just big businesses that are being targeted anymore. Small businesses, managed service providers are all being targeted. And most companies have changed their AV 3 times in the last decade in the hope that the new antivirus would be better at detecting and preventing malware. Like I said at the beginning of this, every time you open an application on your computer, that application has access to everything that you have access to. So what can we do about this? First, we want to stop applications that are not needed. The simple answer is if you cannot run an application, if you cannot run a piece of malware or TeamViewer or Zoom, then it can't encrypt your files. It can't access your data. Now, of course, that's not always viable, but if we can take away the risk of applications running that are not needed in our business environment, whether those applications are Chrome extensions, TeamViewer, Office applications, encryption software, or malware, we can essentially stop those applications from accessing the data we don't want them to. The second thing we can do is once applications are running, we can ring fence them. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the ring fencing concept, ring fencing is a concept that ThreatLocker created about 2.5 years ago. And the idea is first of all, to stop untrusted applications with our application whitelisting. And secondly, to control applications that can run. So if you do run Office, it doesn't mean it should be able to do everything untethered. If, for example, Office may be on your list of trusted applications, as may PowerShell, but that doesn't mean Office needs to call PowerShell or Internet Explorer needs to call PowerShell. If we go back to last November, there was a vulnerability in Internet Explorer that allowed an attacker to run PowerShell commands directly on your computer without even a click from a user. The same applies to Office macros, links in Office documents, and unfortunately, Zoom. If we ring fence these applications, first of all, we can stop the attacks being springboarded in the first place. We can stop an attacker using a document, using a website, using your Zoom session to launch these back-end weaponizable tools. So if we can block that, we can block those attacks even being launched. The second thing we can do is we can ring fence the backend tools, the weaponizable tools, to say they don't need access to our file shares. Just because PowerShell needs to run, or just because RegServe needs to run, it doesn't mean it needs to access your file shares. It doesn't mean it needs to access your data. The same applies with Solitaire and Angry Birds and TeamViewer or any of the other applications you use on a day-to-day basis that aren't Office applications that don't need access to your shares. If you ring fence them and stop them accessing your shares, it means if or when they are compromised, that they won't be able to do damage or steal your data. And then we can also ring fence them to stop them going out to the internet. So if we want to stop the attack at 3 different layers or 4 different layers, first we say to stop untrusted apps. Then we say once an app is trusted, we say, okay, it can only do what it needs to do. Zoom needs to run, but it only needs to go to zoom.us. It doesn't need to access PowerShell. It doesn't need to go to my file system. Now, if it is compromised, it's far less damaging to our business. Of course, patch your applications as well, but unfortunately, zero-day exploits are becoming more and more common. The same applies with RegServe and PowerShell and all of those other built-in weaponizable tools that are used in so many of today's ransomware attacks. Now, one of the things we're seeing as well, it's not just about malware, good software or bad software. In the last month alone, I have spoken to 6 MSPs, at least 6, I can count 6 of them, that have been impersonated by attackers, where an attacker has sent an email to the MSP's clients, either spoofing the MSP's address or sending from a similar address, asking the client to click on a TeamViewer link, to click on a Log Me In link. And when they click on that link, they will then go onto their computer, they will look at their saved passwords, they will try and encrypt their files. And in one case, the client called the MSP to ask the MSP why they were looking at their saved passwords. And that's the only reason the MSP found out someone had impersonated them. This is becoming more and more common. If TeamViewer, if you use Log Me In, if you use TeamViewer, if you use Screen Connect, fine, that is one tool you need to use in your environment, but limit it to the Screen Connect server or the server that you need, and limit the applications to the smallest surface area possible. That way, they're less likely to be used in an attack against you. So one of the things that everybody says to me is zero trust is difficult. And 5 years ago, I'm working in the enterprise space. And in the enterprise space, I would always try and encourage people, use zero trust. We didn't call it zero trust back then. It was the buzzwords of today's marketing campaigns. But the reality was we were talking about default deny, stopping things run by default. And every time I tried to push this, quite often I would get pushback saying, this is too hard, this is too expensive, we don't have the resources. And back then, my approach was, take your medicine, stop complaining. And while I still have a little bit of that in me, ThreatLocker came around to take the approach of zero trust and make it easy, not just for big enterprises, not just for banks and Department of Defense and government agencies, but for every enterprise, every IT department, and every managed service provider. And if we look at some of the complexities around zero trust, we can start off by saying, well, there's 20 to 30,000 files, executables, DLL files, script files that run on every single computer out there. If we're going to implement this across 1,500 endpoints, 100 different businesses, how are we supposed to catalog all that to begin with? Then even when we do catalog it, what do we do about the Windows updates and the Office updates and the Chrome updates and the Adobe updates and the Automate updates and the Synchro updates and every other application that we use that self-updates every single time we run it? Zoom updates is updated 3 times. When we're taking a zero trust approach, one of the biggest challenges, well, what happens when it updates? It's now no longer trusted. So what ThreatLocker wanted to do was we wanted to take these problems, we wanted to deal with the difficulty in deployment, we wanted to deal with the constant application updates and the difficult approval processes, and we wanted to make it really, really easy. And we start by simply learning. We have quite a few MSPs here in the Robin Robbins event, one of which is going to join us in a few minutes to talk about his experience with ThreatLocker, who have successfully deployed zero trust to their entire stack, to all of their customers by default. And the first thing in doing that is auditing and finding out what is needed in your environment. So when you deploy the ThreatLocker agent, it takes moments to deploy. It integrates with any RMM, automatically creates your clients in our multi-tenant portal. It will start to catalog every program, every DLL, every script file on your computer, who is opening those files, what processes are opening those files. And then we can automatically build out policies for your environment based on what your environment looks like today. We can match those policies to built-in applications. So when you're running Google Chrome or you're running Automate or Windows or any of the popular or 200 to 300, so I wouldn't even say popular applications we have in our database, we're going to match the things we find on your computer to those applications. Now, this is important for 2 reasons. First of all, it gives you confidence that this is actually Microsoft Office. This is actually Google Chrome and not some fake file that pretends to be. But it also allows you to not worry when those applications update, because ThreatLocker has the team behind you to make sure the moment there is a Windows update, the moment there is an Office update, the moment there is a Chrome update, we're going to update those definitions for you. So if you have a policy to allow Office today, it's still going to work tomorrow. This takes away most of the management associated with application whitelisting and zero trust. We're also going to catalog your custom applications and build in custom rules to allow those applications automatically out the box. We typically recommend you let this learn for a week. So to look at a typical deployment, you push this out, do it at the end of the demo. You can push out 2,000 seats. You wait a week, you come back in, you review your policies, and then you lock it down. The next thing we do is we take care, we have a really simple approval process. We then build in standardized out-of-the-box ring-fencing policies. Today, we're using Zoom, using a ring-fence version of Zoom. So if somebody sends me a link through this Zoom session, and that link sends me to fileless malware, tries to access my files, tries to give me malware, Zoom is successfully ring-fenced, so it cannot access any of that data. So use our out-of-the-box ring-fencing policies to make your life really simple. See everything that's running, not just from an application point of view, but from a file point of view. If you can get visibility on what documents are being accessed by what applications, by what users, not only can you build policies around it to make sure untrusted applications can't access your data, that your backup drives can only be accessed by your backup software, or your QuickBooks databases can only be accessed by QuickBooks. But you can also see when somebody deletes files, does mass copies, uploads things to the internet that they shouldn't do, and lock down USB devices and storage devices and local folders on your C drive as well. It's really important to control not just who has access to your files, but what has access to your files. Just because I can access documents, it doesn't mean that PowerShell running under my user should be able to. It doesn't mean POSI should be able to, or any application that doesn't need to be able to. We can enforce encryption. So when you are using portable storage, we can make sure that the devices are encrypted and encryption is required. If you can block USB drives, great. If you can't, audit them. See who's using them, see who's bringing things in and out, prevent certain file types. So why should you use policy-driven controls if I haven't already convinced you already? First of all, policy-driven controls are extremely effective at stopping data breaches, more so than the traditional antivirus. And while we're not a replacement for an antivirus, we do have an extremely successful record of stopping malware, known and unknown, because we're not relying on looking for malware based on patterns and definitions. We're simply saying it cannot run unless you as the MSP approve this file to run. It reduces data breaches. There are two types of ransomware. There's the ransomware that everybody's happy to talk about. They're happy to say, oh, my files have been encrypted and now I need to, or not happy, but not embarrassed to say that. They feel they're a victim when their files are encrypted. But there's another type of ransomware that often doesn't get spoken about. And that's the type where somebody copies your data, your medical data, your customer data, and then they threaten to publish that or disclose that they breached your data to the internet if you don't pay that money. People like to keep that quiet. It's not just about stopping file encryption, but also stopping file access. It helps you get compliant. If you do have DFARS, NIST 800-171 or ISO 27002 control requirements, using policy-driven controls, using storage controls and USB controls and ring-fencing controls can help you with that compliance requirement. Now, compliance isn't the bar. It shouldn't be the standard. It should be the absolute minimum. The fact that compliance is set by the government shows how far behind what the standard should be. I'm just going to finalize before I introduce Neil Gern from Gern Technology, and I'm just going to wrap up by saying a couple of things. First of all, stop trying to change your AV every time it fails you, because the reality is getting a new house alarm every time someone breaks into your house isn't going to stop someone breaking into your house. Put some bolts on the door, change your approach, add application whitelisting, ring fencing, and storage-based policies to your environment to control what's happening. Stop any untrusted applications from running, ring fence them when they have to run, and reduce your surface area of attack. The more you can reduce your surface area of attack, the less likely you are to be controlled, to be breached. This is not just for large organizations. If you're a managed service provider in this space and you want to be serious, you want to compete against the big boys, you need to actually make sure that you are locking down your environments, you're giving your customers true value and not just bundled antivirus and upselling it at a higher price. Customers who have true value are going to refer you to other customers, they're going to be grateful when their machines stop getting infected, and you're ultimately going to win deals that you wouldn't be able to win if you're just saying, I'm going to bundle antivirus. You need to stand out against your competition. I appreciate your time. I'd like to introduce Neil Gern now, and thank you for your attention. Now I'd like to introduce Neil Gern from Gern Technology. Neil is one of ThreatLocker's gold partners and a true advocate of Zero Trust. I'd like him to talk a little bit about how he's integrated Zero Trust into his managed service provider and uses it across his client board. Neil, thank you for joining me, and thank you for being a ThreatLocker partner.
Thanks, Danny, for having me on. It all kind of started with us a little more than a year ago, we had a client that got hit with malware that turned out to be ransomware. And the tools we were using at the time were able to sort of contain it, but not fully. And when we kind of went back and did an analysis of how it got in, we realized that there's definitely a gap in the tool set. At least in our opinion, there was a gap in the tool set that was allowing some things to get in. And about a year ago, I was at boot camp and I went to Huntress's breakout session, and Kyle kind of showed a way, one method that someone might get into your environment. And the way they did that was through a word macro virus. They just emailed a fake resume with a .m file, and that's exactly what happened in our scenario. So we realized there's a gap. We went looking for solution, and that's how we found ThreatLocker.
So one of the big concerns that a lot of managed service providers say, and we're seeing huge uptake in this zero trust approach, and of course, unfortunately, most of the time the MSP world follows the enterprise world. So we start off with big federal government. The only thing the government's ahead on is security, and then we move into the large enterprise, and then we see the MSP trailing behind. What would you say to people who say, I'm scared of zero trust, and how would you say ThreatLocker's alleviated some of those fears?
I think if you say that, I think if you say you're scared of zero trust, it's because you're scared of maybe the administrative overhead of trying to manage a zero trust solution. And for us, looking at how ThreatLocker worked, and the way it's set up for us is a user tries to launch something that's not authorized. They click request permission, opens a ticket on our ticket board. We analyze it. We make sure it's legitimate. We approve it. We can approve it for all their systems or just that one system. So really, if you kind of put that into your daily help desk workflow, it's not a huge burden. I think that was our fear in the beginning, was is this going to be a huge burden? And so once you get that done, I tell all of our guys on the help desk, I'd rather spend all day, if I had to, approving ThreatLocker tickets than responding to some major outbreak or something like that. So it's worth it, and it's not a huge burden because the tool's pretty easy to administer.
And if you were to say, in terms of your sales cycle and how being, and I'm going to go as far as saying a serious player in the MSP world, because there's a lot of MSPs that are trying to just get by with a minimum amount of tools. But how would you say having ThreatLocker and having a zero trust approach has helped you drive your business forward?
You know, we use it as a selling point. So when we go in to clients, we show them, and it's interesting because the management of companies that we show this to, they get it and they say, yes, we want that. I'll give you an example. We were competing for a very large contract. This was last October, and we received it in November. We were awarded the contract in November. Well, that large prospect said, "Hey, one of our vendors was hit with ransomware. What would you do to stop this in our environment?" And because we had this experience with ThreatLocker, with a very good security stack, we were able to quickly say, "Hey, here's our security stack. Here's how ThreatLocker could have prevented that." They took that to their management, and we ended up winning that contract. And that is a very sizable contract. It's about a 430 user company at about $33,000 a month MRR. So it's a game changer. And I think the mindset is, Robin talks about with marketing, sometimes you need to outspend the competition. And so we kind of took that approach of, we're not going to be afraid to spend money on security. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to spend more and show our potential clients and our clients that we're taking it seriously and we're doing what it takes. So it's been huge for us. Huge.
And that's really it, isn't it? You can't just, it's not enough to just bundle an antivirus anymore. You need to show your clients you take security seriously, and you need to deliver on that promise. I was at a trade show back before this whole COVID craziness cancelled all trade shows a few weeks ago, or a month ago now, I guess, in Chicago, And there was about 120 managed service providers in the room. And during my presentation, one of the things I asked them was, how many of you haven't had a client with ransomware? And only 2 people in the room put their hands up in the last 2 years. It really, and every single one of them, we followed up with who runs an antivirus. Every single one of those MSPs ran an antivirus. And it's not just the client, obviously the overhead of recovering from that now, but also loss of clients, loss of confidence in your business.
Absolutely, and that was a wake-up call when we had that one client that got hit, and for us it was a wake-up call, and we said, never again. We can't risk it. You just can't. So I just saw yesterday a very large MSP in the news hit with ransomware, their clients hit with ransomware. So now's the time to invest and really do what it takes. I mean, it's for us, we're actually looking at MSSP. We're looking at how do we evolve and make sure we're doing both really well.
And the 2 concepts really with ThreatLocker, or the 3 concepts, it's really about policy-driven controls and least privilege and least trust where it can be. And the idea is at first we say don't let anything run. So use what's often referred to as application whitelisting, and we deny everything unless what's explicitly trusted. And for most companies, we draw a line in the sand and say, okay, we're going to take the environment as it is, we're going to catalog that environment, and then we're going to learn for a week, and then we're going to put that live. You guys went one step further, and you actually said, we're going to do it proper style. We're going to say, we're going to assume the environments are bad, we're going to catalog only what we know is good, and we're going to deal with the extra set of tickets. How bad was that for you? Was that as terrifying as it might seem?
At first it was. At first we thought, wow, what are we getting into here? We're going to deny almost everything and then approve what we know is good. But it really wasn't as bad as we thought. And you start to learn that there's a lot of installed software out in people's environment that they're not even using, that they shouldn't even be using. And so kind of our normal operations now are, we go in with Huntress right off the bat to look for, known bad software, but then we also don't necessarily just trust what's there. We'd rather say, hey, let's deny more and then give back what they really need. And that's working great. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, it's neat. And again, the management in companies that we talk to that get it, they're all for it. And they say, we don't care if we have a power user or someone who complains, too bad for them, because we got to have this protection.
Well, I think that's it. The larger companies, the bigger clients, the clients you really want on the hook, they care more about their business. They didn't get to 50, 100, 200, 400 seats by dealing with complaining users. They got to it because they said business comes first, protecting our assets comes first. And you guys, you've implemented a lot of our ring-fencing policies, and you've really taken the approach beyond just what can run, but also what it can do once it's running. So we take things like Office and say we do not want it to call PowerShell, and then we assume that even though we've blocked things like Office or Internet Explorer or Google Chrome from launching PowerShell, we assume it's going to get launched anyway because that's the best way to be. And then we take things like PowerShell and we say don't let it access our file systems. Has that caused you any pain, or has it been relatively seamless?
We've had one incident across all, and we, just so you know, we roll this out to every client. It's not optional. I mean, if you're coming on with us, as a new customer, you're getting ThreatLocker. And we've had one client that works in the financial industry, and they're still using some old Excel sheets that launched some weird stuff. And we said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll put that into a separate virtual machine that's protected away from your production environment, and you can run that there, but you can't run it on your production systems. And that's worked fine, So one out of, I don't know, a lot of customers. So it hasn't been a big burden at all.
Okay, that's good to hear. Would you like to add anything or any questions from me at this point?
I would just say I feel like your staff's done a great job of evolving the product. I mean, when we first started, we did take kind of a hard line of, Even with the ring fencing and everything, we were saying, hey, shut everything off, and then we'll turn it back on as they need it. And so I know initially you guys adjusted a few things in your defaults and stuff. So we really appreciate that you were super flexible on that, because it's helped us tremendously. So we again just appreciate your kind of partnership with your customer, not just throwing a product out there.
Yeah, and this managed service provider has been a big transition for us. If we go back 18 months and we had one managed service provider customer and we focused primarily on defense contractors and banking and finance, and today 90+% of our sign-ups are MSP and our focus, and our product has evolved so much in the last 18 months, and that's mainly because of feedback from partners like you who've actually come to us and said, this is where I'm struggling, this is where it's different in our world of lots of small clients versus one big client, and we've really been able to help, and we appreciate your feedback and your continued partnership.
Yeah. My background also is from the enterprise. That's where I came from. And so when I see a product like this, the fact that you made it to where we can, manage it across all of our clients, that's huge for us, because that's what we're always looking for. If you work inside of one enterprise, it's fairly easy because your tools are just for that one enterprise. But as soon as you scale to all different clients, it can become harder to manage, but it's really not. We use ConnectWise Manage. You guys helped us, with that integration. Works really good. So
yeah, that's good to hear. Well, Neil, thank you for your time, and I hope you stay safe and enjoy your virtual conference.
thank you. We'll see you, Danny.
Okay, thank you.